And we're here in studio with the national president of the Zionist Organization of America, Mort Klein. Welcome back to Jerusalem, and welcome to our studios.
It's great to be in Jerusalem, and your studios are as nice as any of the mainstream studios that I've spoken at. Really beautiful.
Thank you so much. And you're here as part of the delegation of Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations. And I've known you for a long time, and I would say that the Zionist Organization of America occupies a very important voice within the Conference of Presidents, and in that way distinct from some of the other groups in the conference. Tell me a little bit more about what Zionist Organization of America does and what it means to the overall spectrum of American Jewish organizations.
We are the only rational centrist group in the conference. All the other groups are somewhat left-wing or far left-wing. We're the only member in the conference that, since time immemorial, has publicly opposed the Palestinian Arab state, making it clear it'll be a terrorist state, that'll be a terrible danger to Israel. Not another major Jewish group has publicly come out against the state. In fact, all the major Jewish groups after 10/7 have come out endorsing a Palestinian state. AJ Committee, Ted Deutsch, ADL, AIPAC on their website, Dennis Ross on the Washington Institute for Near East Policy has not only supported a Palestinian Arab state in Judea and Samaria and Gaza, but demands that Abbas should be the head of it.
Mahmoud Abbas, the head of the Palestinian Authority.
So we're the only ones who take those positions. We were virtually the only organization to have opposed Oslo and Arafat, explaining this will be a disaster for the Jewish people. And of course, tragically, that's exactly what happened. And we were the only Jewish group in the Conference of Presidents. We actually had a vote. It was 50-1 opposing the Gaza withdrawal, forcing 10,000 Jews out of their homes in Gaza and in northern Samaria.
Wait, so you were the lone vote in opposing the Gaza withdrawal?
The lone vote in opposing it, 50-1. Every single group, every Orthodox group, that you can think of in the conference, voted in favor of it. In fact, Malcolm Hoenlein asked me to debate Mort Zuckerman before the vote. Zuckerman was in favor of it. I was opposed to it. And after the debate, to show what a brilliant debater I am.
Well, you are a pretty brilliant debater. I've seen it in action.
Well, that's kind of you to say, but I only convinced myself to vote against it. Everyone voted in favor.
Why is that? Why did everybody else vote in favor? I mean, history's obviously demonstrated that you were right.
Not only, of course, we were right, not a single organization has apologized or expressed concern.
But why? Let's go into the deeper why. I mean, obviously, of 50 organizations voting in favor, one voting against, the one was correct, but 50 were wrong. Why are 50 Jewish organizations in America wrong? Why do they insist upon it?
Because you had George Bush, the Republican president, supporting it, and you had the right-wing Ariel Sharon supporting it, promising this will bring peace. And people were reluctant to go against both America and Israel, especially when the person promoting it was a right-of-center guy who helped build these communities. They just thought he must understand something. But I will tell you, I had a meeting with Ariel Sharon before this debate, one-on-one, and asked him, please explain to me why this is a good idea. If it is, I'm all in favor of it. I only want good for Israel. To me, and I explained why I thought this is a potential disaster. And he rambled for 20 minutes with me and never explained it. And I saw he really had no reason to do this, except people tell me that the reason he did it was, in fact, that he and his sons were being investigated for bribery and corruption. And he was advised to do some major peace move, and the left-wing judiciary will leave you alone. That's what I was told. It's never been proven, but it made no sense to unilaterally force 10,000 Jews out of their homes without getting anything from the Arabs. And it was astonishing that in fact, after the vote, I said to Malcolm Hoenlein and the chairman of the conference at the time, that you will rue the day that you supported this. You will rue the day. And
Here we are.
Where the 10-7, of course, never would have happened. Not to mention the disaster that was thrust upon these 10,000 Jewish families, these Jewish people. Their lives were turned upside down.
Right.
And you know, they still had to pay their mortgages. And the homes they were thrown out of, they still had to pay the mortgages, even though they weren't in their homes anymore.
Wow. And, so you were warning that Gaza would turn into a terror haven. We've seen that it was taken over by Hamas. And we've just gone through the worst massacre in modern Jewish history since the founding of the state on October 7th, just about 500 days ago. And now we've been fighting a bitter war, for the last 16 months almost. And yet it feels like things may be turning because there's a new president in the White House, a president that's not beholden to the thinking of the State Department or the Department of Defense for all these years, which held that the only possible outcome to the conflict is a two-state solution. We heard Blinken and Biden talking over and over again about how this conflict must lead to a two-state solution.
But let me immediately say, we need to stop using the inaccurate misnomer two-state solution. Israel's already a state. The accurate term is Palestinian state solution. That's what they're talking about. But by saying two-state solution, the left was very clever to make it seem as if each side's getting something. The Jews and Israel is getting nothing but a terror state on their longest borders. So we really should only use the term Palestinian state solution. And it is remarkable that 10 days after 10/7, after October 7th, Biden came to Israel. And everyone cheered. What a tremendous friend he is. Look, he came to Israel in the middle. We're beginning a war here, and he came to meet with us. And on the tarmac, as soon as he got off the plane, what did he promote on the tarmac? He said, we need to establish a Palestinian state. 10 days after this massacre, he's rewarding the massacre and wishing to establish a terrorist state. We know it'll be a terrorist state because Gaza was a mini terrorist state, and the Palestinian Authority pays Arabs to murder Jews, promotes hatred and violence in every aspect of their culture. And yet, that's what Trump proposed. And yet, all the Israeli leaders, all the Jewish leaders, the rabbis.
That's what Biden proposed.
Excuse me. That's what Biden proposed. Thank you. And yet, everybody praised Biden for coming to Israel now, even though he was demanding a Palestinian state. And he came there, now we know, to pressure Israel not to go into Gaza. That's why he was there, to make sure they don't go into Gaza. And that's why Bibi was pressured, and Israel waited a month till they went into Gaza. And then later, of course, Biden pressured Israel not to go into Rafah, threatening he'll withhold all arms if they do. Really, as anti-Israel as possible. And it took 3 months for Bibi to go into Rafah, and that was so important that he did that. So this Biden-Obama administration, I say Biden-Obama because virtually every person that Biden appointed to posts that affect Israel were friends of Obama's.
Yeah, holdovers from the Obama.
That is right. Obama is really calling the shots, I believe. And now, under Trump, we have the most pro-Israel cabinet I've ever seen in my 31 years as president of ZOA.
Yeah, we have Marco Rubio's here in Israel today. Tell me a little bit about some of the members of the new cabinet and what your experience has been with them.
Mm-hmm. Marco Rubio is an extraordinary friend of Israel, never has been anything but incredibly articulate, very eloquent in all of his speeches. He has publicly stated when he was attacked in front of his office about supporting the war against Hamas, he said publicly, he said, I want you to quote me, it's Hamas's fault. Every Arab death is because of Hamas. They should be destroyed. I support that. So he's always been courageous on Israel issues. Pete Hegseth, the new Secretary of Defense, you don't get a more pro-Israel guy than Pete Hegseth. He's gone to Judea and Samaria several times. He says the Jews have every right to live in Judea. He said, after all, you Jews are Judeans. Jew is a contraction of the word Judean. That's why we're called Jews. He supports that, and he understands the Arab-Islamic war against the Jews in Israel and the West. You have Kristi Noem, the head of Homeland Security, very pro-Israel person. Mike Waltz, the National Security Council head, very pro-Israel. And you can't get a better pro-Israel person as the soon-to-be confirmed ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee. When people ask me, Mort, don't you feel badly that Donald Trump didn't ask you to be the ambassador to Israel? I say, I do feel badly, except I was pleased to see he appointed somebody more pro-Israel than I am, Mike Huckabee.
More pro-Israel than you.
That's right.
I mean, I do think there are some advantages to having Mike Huckabee be appointed in the fact that, A, he's the governor and is taken very seriously on the national stage, was former presidential candidate, but also the fact that he's not Jewish. I mean, there's a big advantage to demonstrating to America, and particularly to part of the right flank in the United States, that is questioning whether Israel should really, America should be supportive of Israel, right? I mean, this is a big question that now coming through, especially the libertarian flank of the right wing in the United States.
Well, Mike Huckabee certainly, he does support the most successful Jew the Jews have ever produced, Jesus. So he's a serious Christian, and he's always quoting chapter 12, verse 3 in Genesis, that
he who blesses
will be blessed, those who curse the Jews will be cursed. He's always repeating that. I've spoken at his conferences. There's no one like him when it comes to this. By the way, he will not use the term West Bank. He always says Judea and Samaria and emphasizes that as West Bank is a made-up term, it has nothing to do with the history of that area. It's always been Judea and Samaria.
And it appears as though we're in a new policy course for the United States with the president and his new cabinet trying to turn the page on the potential creation of a Palestinian state. He no longer willing, he's the first president who's not committed outright to the creation of a Palestinian state, although he did have in 2020 his deal of the century, which kind of in a way was going to create some kind of a state minus or canonize some portion of a Palestinian entity in Judea and Samaria. It seems as though now he may not even be committed to what he had tried to do in 2020. And we've also seen this earth-shattering announcement, which really is just based on reality, that the Palestinians living in Gaza are going to have to leave after the IDF military campaign there.
When asked about a Palestinian state, he says always there are other alternatives. He doesn't in any way suggest there should be a Palestinian state. The Abraham Accords, which does mention establishing a sovereign Palestinian entity, I was involved in that peripherally, in that process, and it was clear the only way they could not get the other Arab countries, the Muslim countries, to sign on to this deal unless they stated we support a Palestinian state. They had to do it to get that deal. And so they did it, knowing full well it's not going to be so clear that that will ever happen. And now, of course,
is it worth entering into agreements with other Arab states to normalize peace with Israel if they are insistent on the creation of a Palestinian terror state someplace inside Israel's borders? I mean, isn't that the opposite of what the spirit of the normalization agreements?
We dare not establish a Palestinian Arab state. It'll just be another Hamas-Fatah terrorist state. This was done knowing the odds are extremely slim an Arab state, Palestinian Arab state, will really come into existence. And they thought it was very important to get the deal done, not worrying that there's going to be a state anytime soon. They're really against the state, then they all were. And now President Trump has proposed, as we all know, that because the Gaza Arabs have no really homes to come back to, 70% of Gaza has been destroyed. The rest is in bad shape. So it's not like they can go home and begin their lives once this war is over. They can't. You've got to build new residences and homes for these people. They don't exist in Gaza. So if you're going to build new residences anyway, why not create a situation where no longer will the Hamas-loving, the Hamas-supporting Gaza Arabs be directly adjacent to southern Israel? Move them into the Sinai, which is 5 times the size of Israel, which is essentially empty of people even now. Move them into Jordan, move them into Morocco, move them into Sudan. This is not typically ethnic cleansing because there's nowhere for them to go back to. And they have shown themselves to be a hostile entity. It's not just Hamas. These Gaza Arabs support Hamas, praise Hamas. The polls right now show that 90% of the Gaza Arabs support Hamas now. 93% support what happened on 10/7. These are not innocent civilians. These are Jew haters who want to harm Jews and harm Israel. So I think this is an important step to move in that direction. But I am worried about something. That even if this happens, and we support it happening, my worry is if it happens and America ends up owning this parcel of land, what happens when the next president comes in and he feels differently? He can bring the Arabs back in. He can change everything. That's why we at ZOA believe Israel has really got to control Gaza. They have to have control over it because if it's only this administration, the next one may feel differently and everything can change again.
Exactly. The president, I think, took the prime minister by surprise last week in Washington when he said that the United States would own the Strip. At the same time, he followed up with a question later in the week asking about whether the United States would buy it. And he said, well, there's nothing to buy. We'll just control it. But I think that there's a big difference between the question of sovereignty over a territory versus property ownership, right? So you can come in and say, hey, I'm going to develop this property within Gaza and I will own the property that I build, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the United States should be sovereign. Also because Trump has said that there will be no American troops on the ground. And obviously any area that the Gaza Strip's going to have to be patrolled militarily, controlled. So the only possible candidate to control this area is, unfortunately, I say unfortunately, that the country that gave it up wrongly in 2005 is the state of Israel, to get it back.
And Israel should also make clear, and no one knows this, under international law, Gaza is Israeli sovereign territory. The mandate of 1922, the British who legally controlled it, that mandate said this is going to be a future home for the Jews. The UN in 1945 reaffirmed the mandate of 1922 that this is Jewish land. Why doesn't anyone say that? So under international law, notwithstanding the Bible, where God gave the standards to this for those who believe in the Bible, but as I said, without the Bible, it's international law. Israel I believe, should say, we'll go in there, we'll clean it out, we'll get rid of all the ordnance, the bombs that are still there, and we hope that maybe America should have some sort of stationary of armed forces there, just like they have in Qatar, have it in Gaza. But Israel will pay for everything, will take care of everything, and will control it because we dare not allow Gaza Arabs who love Hamas and hate Jews to have sovereignty there, to live there, threatening southern Israel again. If there's anything we've learned here is that we cannot allow Arabs to be in Gaza. And we can't allow them, a buffer zone of a mile or two isn't good enough. You can still have rockets coming from other parts of Gaza.
Well, Israel has an even bigger border with Egypt and the Sinai than it does with Gaza. Moving Arabs to the other side of that border, does that also pose a security risk to Israel?
Well, one would hope that Egypt would not allow a security risk to fester and to occur. That there is a so-called peace deal with Israel, and if that continues, it's Egypt's responsibility to not let Egyptians who live there now or new Egyptians to threaten Israel in any way.
So far, Egypt says that they're not going to accept Gazans. The Jordanians, with the exception of 2,000 sick children, say that they're not going to accept Gazans. Public statements from Saudis and others are that Gazans should not be forced out of the Strip. The president has said it. What leverage does he have, and what do you think is the likelihood that this will actually take place?
Well, it's interesting. President Trump doesn't say, I hope the Egyptians or Jordanians and others will take them in. I believe it's a real possibility. He says a strong declarative statement. They will take him in. I don't know why he says that, but he must have some understanding that he can bring pressure to bear to make it happen. And as you may know, they've already talked about cutting the $2.5 billion in aid if they don't do it. They're going to threaten them with aid and military arms. So that is great leverage. And the fact that Trump says they're going to take him in gives me confidence that Trump is going to do whatever is necessary for that to happen. And this is really good for everyone. The Gaza Arabs will have a better home, a safer home, a more decent home in the Sinai or elsewhere than they have right now in Gaza.
And if you have between 1 and 2 million Gazans taken out of the demographic equation of individuals between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea, meaning that Jews would then have an overwhelming majority in terms of population. What does that do to the equation with regard to international pressure for the creation of a Palestinian state in Judea and Samaria?
This will unequivocally end Hamas. They'll have nowhere to operate. Egypt won't let them operate in the Sinai if it happens. Jordan won't let them operate. And the pressure for a Palestinian state will dissipate dramatically. So everything about this deal is positive. For the Arabs as well, they'll have a better life elsewhere than they've had in Gaza. Gaza was a terrible place to live. And so I think ultimately, everyone will accept this deal when it's talked about more, when they understand the benefits, when they understand the losses that America can inflict upon Egypt, Jordan, and other places. I think slowly but surely it's going to be accepted. You know, a new idea is almost in science. I used to be in science. A new idea is almost always throughout scientific history rejected as ridiculous. Then, slowly but surely, when there's more evidence that scientific idea was true, what happens is the scientists start saying, well, of course it's true. What's the big deal? They go from saying this is ridiculous to acting as if we always knew it. I think you're going to see that here. It's going to go from this is impossible then, of course this is the right thing to do. It's better for everybody.
Meanwhile, Israel's still struggling to get its remaining hostages out. Now, President Trump had sent his special envoy, Steve Witkoff, to get a deal done before the inauguration. And it was the deal that was really put forward for the most part by the Biden administration back in May. For whatever reasons, Witkoff and Trump wanted to see that deal done before the inauguration, when perhaps Israel's negotiating position would have been a lot stronger had they waited until the Biden negotiators like Brett McGurk and others were out of the room. But that's not what happened. And now Israel's entered into this deal where they've been getting, as we've seen just yesterday, approximately 3 hostages a week over a period of 6 weeks, in which there's a ceasefire, in which Israel is retreating from some of the positions that it held inside the Gaza Strip. The president has said that he had expected all of the hostages to be released by this Saturday at 12 p.m. That didn't happen. Let's talk a little bit about this deal.
First of all, Trump said by January 20th, I demand every hostage release or all hell will break loose. Mm-hmm. It didn't happen. And I was sorry to see that he made a statement and didn't follow through. If you make a statement like that, don't make it unless you're going to follow through. Otherwise, Hamas terrorists will learn your words don't mean much and they won't worry about anything you say. Benjamin Netanyahu said this week, if they're not all released by this Shabbos, by Saturday at 12 noon, all hell will break loose, and it didn't happen. Bibi should not have said that. Look, all of our hearts break for the Jews that are held hostage. It's a disaster and a horror for the families, for our fellow Jewish brothers and sisters. But a prime minister has to do what's best for the country, not just for these families that are aching and in so much pain. And the fear is that studies show that the majority of terrorists who are released go back to terrorism. So I'm very worried that these terrorists will end up killing more Jews in the future than we're saving right now. In addition, this sends a message that terrorism pays. That's a terrible message to send, and it sends a message that kidnapping pays. You cannot reward these types of horrific actions. So I'm very concerned about this deal that they made, and I think it would have been better off to use other techniques, military action, I don't know what, but not to make such a deal. And by the way, many of the scholars who study such things have said this is not a good idea. And the most famous one is Robert Oman, the Nobel Prize-winning mathematician, economist at Hebrew University, said this is a terrible, terrible deal.
You're going to hear tonight from the prime minister, presumably, if he's not consumed with war strategy and the like, but he usually makes it a point to speak to the conference, even though I would venture to say that many of the conference members have been very critical of Netanyahu over the years in which he's been the prime minister. Tell me Do you think that the Prime Minister is going to find a supportive audience this evening? And what do you expect the Prime Minister to say?
First of all, out of 50 or so members of the Conference of Presidents, historically, and I've been coming every year, maybe 12 to 20 of the organizations are represented. The majority of them don't show up. Many of the people in the audience are either spouses, additional people from the same organization, or donors. So you really don't have the leadership of the Jewish world in that room. The people in that room are almost all left-wing. There's virtually no right-of-center groups in the conference except ZOA. And I'm including OU. They're not right-of-center. National Council of Young Israel stays neutral. They don't do anything. So most of the people in that room do not like Netanyahu. Most of the people in that room support a state. You should give him Judea and Samaria. You should give him Gaza, set up a state. Dennis Ross wrote an op-ed only a few months ago to set up of the Washington for Near East policy. Astonishingly, he wrote an op-ed, they should have a state and Abbas should be the president. Ted Deutsch, American Jewish Committee, wrote an op-ed, this is after 10/7, supporting a state. AIPAC on their website continues to this minute to support a state. And none of them support the right of Jews to live in Judea and Samaria. They just say nothing. Moreover, AIPAC, when they're asked by a member of Congress, what is your position of Jews building and living in Judea and Samaria? AIPAC answers, we take no position. Now, when you say take no position, you're really sending the message that we're not too happy about it. It's not something we support. In fact, when I complained to Howard Core when he was executive director, he was just replaced recently, at an executive committee meeting of which I was a member, I'm a member. Why are you opposing Jews living in Judea and Samaria? This is a terrible position. He said, we don't oppose it. We say we take no position. I said, it's the same thing. He said, no, it's not. And I said, Howard, if you said to your wife, honey, do you love me? And she says, I'm not taking a position. Do you think you're in trouble? By saying you're not taking a position sends a message to every member of Congress, you're really opposed to it. And this is outrageous that none of them support the right of Jews to live there, of the major Jewish groups, and none of them oppose a Palestinian state. The Jewish organizations have really been incorrect in almost all these issues, and they will not, they view Netanyahu, even though it's not accurate, that he's a right-wing guy and we don't like his policies. And no, he will not find a receptive audience who agrees with his policies. But he will get respectable applause.
Tell me a little bit about some of the activities of the ZOA.
Well, we have three major divisions. We have a Law and Justice Center, headed by Susan Tuckman, a lawyer. Susan Tuckman and I and ZOA spent 6 years, we had launched a 6-year campaign to change Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, which disallows discrimination or harassment against minorities. But that didn't include Jews. It was basically blacks and Hispanics. We fought for 6 years to change that to include Jews. I begged AIPAC, ADL, AJ Committee to help us to change this interpretation. They refused. In fact, ADL, Abe Foxman and his people publicly condemned us for this, saying, you don't go around suing people by changing Title VI, you can sue. You use diplomacy to get people to agree with you, which of course is nonsense. We got it changed, and now Title VI covers Jews. Every lawsuit you see it's being launched by any of the groups, there are many of them now, it's because we got that law changed. And we filed more lawsuits than anyone else, and we filed the first lawsuits. We have full-time lobbyists on Capitol Hill promoting our agenda. Our most proud achievement is that we convinced senators to put together legislation in 1995 to move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. No Jewish organization would help us with this. Why? They said this will lead to terrorism, and it'll destroy any chance for peace. They all opposed it. We got it passed, and unfortunately, there was a security waiver included in that bill, and that security waiver was inserted by none other than Dianne Feinstein, a Jewish senator from California, and her aide, Dan Shapiro, who became ambassador to Israel. They put that in. It was really known as a poison pill to destroy that legislation, and we couldn't get it out. But ultimately, because of that legislation, Trump invoked that legislation and moved the embassy. So we're very proud of that. And we promote our agenda to members of Congress every single day. And we have a large number of campus professionals. We're on 70 campuses, bringing in speakers, handing out literature, explaining to kids on campus how best to fight the propaganda lies. We explain the lies. And of course, we write op-eds and press releases, and I go on TV and radio like this wonderful program. So we're a full-service organization. And again, we are rational centrists. We are not right-wing. Being opposed to Oslo was correct. It was not right-wing. Being opposed to the Gaza withdrawal was correct. It was not right-wing. We are to the right of all the left-wing groups. That's why I call ourselves rational centrists. And I say these truths that we fought for is not a political position. Truth is not a political position. So, in fact, only last night at the dinner with the Conference of Presidents, Friday night, not last night, Friday night, Michael Oren was the speaker. I raised my hand first after his speech to ask a question. Michael said, Mort, first I have to admit, you were right about everything. Michael Oren, a left-of-center guy, acknowledged finally that ZOA was correct in all the positions, and we were vilified and attacked for the positions we've taken. Now, finally, more and more people understand the truth of the Arab-Islamic war against the Jews, Israel, and the West. This war is not about land. It's not about a state. People have to understand that. It's about destroying Israel and killing Jews. And that's why no matter what Israel has offered, it's never worked. Israel has offered a state to the Palestinian Arabs 4 times in the last 20 years. 8 times in the last 80 years. Since the Appeal Commission in 1937, they offered the Arabs 95% of the rest of Palestine. 80% of original Palestine is Jordan. They offered 95% of the rest. The Jews get 5. They rejected it. And they've rejected every offer since then. Why? Because it's not about statehood. Israel demands in every agreement they've offered, you must accept Israel as a Jewish state. They won't do it. You must not bring hundreds of thousands or millions of Arabs into Israel. They won't agree to it. And they also won't agree to a clause. Prime Minister Ehud Barak and Ehud Olmert told me this. They won't put in the clause saying no more complaints, no more
End of conflict.
End of conflict. And they said, Arafat and Abbas said, you must take that out. They won't agree to saying it's the end of conflict, even though they're giving Israel, the Arabs, everything. Olmert didn't compromise. He offered everything they could want. 97% of Judea and Samaria, 3% of Israel proper to make up for the 3% they didn't get, half of Jerusalem, billions of dollars in aid, and Abbas said no. It's not about land, it's not about statehood, it's about Israel's existence. That's why nothing has worked. And the problem is, to this day, most Jewish leaders still think it's about a state, even though they've turned down every offer, because they can't bear the horror to think that it's about the fact that we're Jews and we have a Jewish state. Because if it's about that, it's very hard to resolve it. But if it's about land or a state, you can resolve it. But history has shown that's not what it's about. Jewish leaders, rabbis, many leaders in America will not accept that truth. It's not about statehood or land. It's about Israel's very existence. And that's why every offer has been turned down.
Mort Klein, National President of Zionist Organization of America, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.